Going back to Jesus then, as a historian, from your perspective, what is your opinion on the historicity or the actual happening? How likely is it? How sure are you that Jesus A was a real person, that he was crucified, and that he was resurrected?
Well, look, this is history, and so I always teach my students that there are no certainties in history. Uh, but there are things you can know with moral certainty. And I don't have any doubt that Jesus existed. And I don't spend my time arguing with mythicists who think that maybe he didn't exist or he probably didn't exist. I myself don't see any way to get around the letters of Paul uh, with the notion that Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus wasn't an historical person. Uh, there's just too much in them that doesn't make sense to me if that's the case. So I've never really spent time uh, on this issue, or I've never written about it at great length. That's what I should say. Now, uh, then you're moving on to crucifixion. Again, if you think Jesus of Nazareth existed, there's no way to avoid the crucifixion. I think the only people who would deny that he was crucified would again be people who don't think he existed at all. They would be the mythicists. So for me, the question becomes interesting, not when you're asking, did Jesus exist or was he crucified? Was he buried is for me an interesting question. And then that gets debated by scholars, and you have people who say yes, and you have people that say no. I'm actually on the conservative side of that question. And that means I think the New Testament evidence and Josephus and the archaeological evidence confirm that we likely have memory in this story of somebody named Joseph of Arimathea, burying Jesus. It leaves lots of questions open, but I think confident is the right word that this is correct. You might know that there are historians who make the case against this. Bart Ehrman is a well-known historian who doesn't think this is true. John Dominic Crossan is another one. But while it's true that the Romans typically didn't care about bodies of crucified victims. In fact, they liked to let them hang there and rot and have the carrion eat them or throw them in piles because they wanted to say, hey, don't do this. Josephus says that they allowed Jews, when it wasn't a time of war, to bury crucified people. And we actually do have an ossuary. You can go to the Jerusalem Museum and you can see it. It's behind a glass case. We have an ossuary that had the bones of a crucified person in it. And these bones come from before AD 70. So it's roughly the time of Jesus, which is archaeological evidence that it was possible to be buried even though you were crucified. And the Gospels all assume this. Paul says it. I personally don't think this would have been invented unless there were I don't think there was a need to invent this. Let's just put it that way. So I'm on the conservative side there. Now I'm even more conservative when it comes to the tomb. So maybe I should say that as an historian, there's decreasing probability here. Everything I'm talking about would be over the 50-50 mark. But I'm morally certain that Jesus existed and then he was crucified. Then I don't know how you measure this. How do you go from 90 to 80%? I don't know what it is. I'm not as morally certain about the burial, but I think it's highly likely. And then the empty tomb, I think it's likely, but I don't have the supreme confidence I have about other issues. Now, we don't need to go into the arguments pro and con, but I'm, again, conservative on that view. Beyond that, an historian can say that there were people convinced, people who had known Jesus, that they had seen him after he was departed. And it seems likely that on at least a couple of occasions, more than one person was involved, that there were group appearances. But look, nobody likes my conclusion here, because what you tend to get is you tend to get skeptics who say, I can prove he didn't rise from the dead, or apologists, some of whom are my friends, who will say, yeah, you can prove that, that this is the most reasonable inference. I think everything depends on your worldview. And if you don't believe in miracles and you hold that view dogmatically, I don't think that the New Testament has enough evidence to overthrow your doubt, to cancel your worldview. And I don't think, therefore, that you can prove Jesus rose from the dead. I think that the data that we have and the conclusions, in my case, that I come to as an historian, are configured by my theology and my worldview. So I don't view this as a sort of bottom-up project so that I can prove Jesus rose from the dead without any religious or Christian presuppositions, and then that makes me believe X, Y, and Z, and eventually I create a Christian universe. I think rather that we have some things that are probable or highly likely, and that our interpretation of them will come from what we otherwise believe or hope or want to be the case, our worldviews, our religious instincts, and so on. So that doesn't satisfy anybody. Everybody's unhappy on that. But I think that's the honest evaluation of the evidence. And it's certainly the case that most of the time, when people are reading books by people who disagree with them on this subject, they don't say, "Oh, okay, I'm a convert now." It does, I'm told, happen once in a while, but I don't see the evidence as overwhelming. I see the evidence as consistent with a Christian worldview, and I'm happy to tell people I think Jesus rose from the dead. But if you are a skeptic, I don't know how to prove this to you.
Yeah, well, the honesty is very much appreciated. I think it's refreshing in a sense to hear somebody confess the faith and be willing to admit that as an academic historian who's devoted essentially your entire, at least academic life to this. I think it takes a lot of humility to come away with an answer that you admit is unsatisfactory to some of your peers. So I think it's admirable.
How can you be anything other than your word is humble when you realize how difficult the issues are, how many the arguments are, how complex they are, and really smart people who have come to different conclusions about the different issues. I I don't know. I'm not sure what the psychology is, but it doesn't bother me to say that I can't prove this to somebody who disagrees with me.
Right. And I suppose that leaves room then for faith. However, you want to make sense of what faith is somewhat
Oh
of
yeah,
a
well that's a huge issue, and I don't even know how to do that one in a cartoon. But I will say that yes, there are more things involved than just historical research and historical
right.
conclusions. And we all know just from looking at ourselves that none of us are sort of machines who can just add up the historical facts and then all of a sudden voila, we have a religion or we have atheism or something like that. That's just not how it works.